Matter Monday. We're starting to get our live feeds up for the night. If you are joining us on various platforms, we are on many. The ones we recommend are Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. Instagram, we have the lowest quality, especially for these virtual streams. So please consider hopping over if you are on Instagram to another platform where you can get higher quality. Tonight, we are talking about independent media and news media. And I'm going to be your host, Cassie Young, a co-founder of Gray Matter Media and Matter News. And I have a couple of guests with me tonight, Devontae Goins and Prince Shakur, and they're going to introduce themselves further. But first, I'll go ahead and just let y'all know a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about tonight and why I invited them on the show before I let them really talk about sort of why they're here. So this is Matter Monday. We do host these every Monday night at 7 p.m. Through the end of this year. And we're talking about different aspects of the news industry and how we want to evolve the news industry, how it is evolving, and why it's evolving. So this is actually a fundraiser. Matter News is nonprofit. And so we have a suggested donation of $5 for tonight's stream, and you can make that on Eventbrite. Or on our website. All the links are on the screen. So just visit those if you're interested in contributing and investing. And we tonight, like I said, are talking about independent media and independent news. So I'm really excited because if you've been tuned in at all, or even if you haven't, FYI, we've been doing these for over a month now. And we've had different discussions about different topics. So I know, like Devontae, I know you've been tuned in to some of them for sure. And we've been talking about just different aspects of the news industry. And so we started out talking about the state of the news industry and sort of how it's declining in a lot of ways, how it's changing. We've talked about the role of local news in democracy and how that decline of the news industry is really impacting, our ability to hold institutions accountable and things like that. Last week, we talked about diversity or a lack thereof in the news industry with one of our contributors and editors. And so all of these things and nonprofit news, which we talked about one week, really tie in, I think, to this idea of independent news and independent media. And I think, a big thing that we're doing with Gray Matter Media and Matter News, and I know the things that you two are involved in are very centered around independence. So really tonight, I just want to talk to y'all a little bit about your views and your thoughts on independent media and news. But first, I'll talk a little bit about why I asked each of you to be on, and then ask you to just kind of elaborate more on more about whatever you want to share about yourself, but especially your role and sort of your connection to independent media. So first, Devontae, you were asked on the show tonight because we met you through covering protests during beginning in May and June. And you've been really active with the Unbossed and Unbought network, which is your own network. And I'll let you talk more about that. But Devontae has been out there on the ground during a lot of protests. And also has been doing live broadcasts and a lot of different things as an independent media maker. So really interested to hear, especially your perspective, because you've been so involved on the ground lately with such, intense things going on. And then Prince, I admit I know less about you and what all you do. I know that you do a lot of things, so I want to hear more from you about what your background is. But I originally got in contact with you through Be Quick. So Black Queer Intersectional Collective, for those who are unfamiliar, is a local group. And I reached out to them because they put out a platform, and you might correct me, but I think it was around June or so. And you can talk more about this, and I want you to. About one of the tenets of it was a free and independent media. So I wanted to hear also from y'all's perspective, and I know that you also have a tie to media, and I think that's why I ended up being directed to you. And you've been a journalist yourself. So I really am interested to hear more of your perspective on why something like that was included in this community organizing effort toward justice. and what the role and importance of independent media is. So now I'd love to give you all the floor. And first, we'll start with Prince. If you want to go ahead and just give a bit of background and take it away for a few minutes, however long you want.
Yeah, thank you. First, thank y'all for letting me be here. My name is Prince Shakur. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a co lead organizer in Black Queer and Intersectional Collective. Be Quick has been around for a few years in Columbus, and we're basically a collective dedicated to Black, queer, and trans liberation. So, Be Quick does community pride. We have a emergency fund for Black LGBTQIA people throughout Central Ohio. Um, we have done protests throughout the summer. We recently did a caravan for Black Trans Lives. And I've been organizing with Be Quick for about over a year and a half. But my personal background is I'm born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to Ohio University and I graduated in 2015. And I've been a grassroots organizer for like the past 6 years. So I started organizing shortly after Michael Brown was killed. I worked in a labor union in Seattle. Um, and then at the beginning of 2016, I started freelance writing. So I started writing a lot for Teen Vogue, for Afropunk, for The Appeal. And so my beats are typically police and prison systems, looking at surveillance technologies and predictive policing, basically anything social justice oriented. Um, yeah, and so I'm a freelance journalist, and I currently am based out of Columbus. So thank you for letting me be here.
Great. Yeah, I struggled because I didn't ask you too much ahead of time, and I should have. But when I was going to make a personal post on my page about who I was going to be speaking with tonight, I almost said you from Be Quick, but I know that you do so much else, and I wasn't sure if you were gonna talk as much about that angle or more so just your other experience. So I didn't want to pigeonhole you there because I know it, and I know even more from what you just said that you have tons of experience that I didn't even know about that I'm super excited that you're going to bring to this conversation. So thank you so much for being here, especially on short notice. And yeah, so we'll talk more in a second. And first, Devonte, let the people know more about you.
All right, awesome, awesome. Thank you for having me on tonight, Casey. I'm Casey, Jesus, Cassie. It's been crazy. I haven't had enough coffee today.
You've got a long weekend.
Yes, I have. I have. As it pertains to how I got involved in independent media here locally, I founded a digital news network called the Unbossed Network. As you can see here from the mic flag, we have several shows on it. I'm the host of the Unbought and Unbossed show. And what the Unbossed Network is it's Columbus's right now only black-owned digital news outlet. And over the past 72 hours or less, we've been happy to partner with Matter News and Gray Matter Media to really break some phenomenal stories. Well, not when I say phenomenal in the sense that mainstream media has gotten it wrong and had to come back and correct their accounts based off of our reporting. And now we are able, being leaders in the industry, to continue forwarding the narrative and bringing forth breaking news. And that's what I really think makes independent media very effective, especially independent local media, because we are able to have the certain types of relationships to where we're able to get information that for example, the Columbus Dispatch, Channel 4, 6, and 10 won't get, but they'll talk to somebody like Matter News and the Unbossed Network. So I'm just happy to be on tonight and to help Matter News and Gray Matter Media raise some money.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll just quickly shout out the fact that the reason Devonte has had a long weekend is if those of you that are tuned in are not aware, there was a killing by a Franklin County deputy who was assigned to the U.S. Marshal, who had, I think, 17 years on CPD's force as well. There's an article on Matter News and the Unbossed Network's website that our editor in chief, Jalen Grisso, and Devonte worked on together. and it talks about the case of Casey Goodson Jr. and what is going on with that, at least that we know of as of yesterday around 5 p.m. We have a lot of other content that's going to be coming out about that case, so stay tuned. But yeah, we've been collaborating, with independent media as Matter News and Gray Matter Media, and I really appreciate what you were saying, like at the end, because that's a perfect segue to where I was going to go next, which is how do you define independent media? Because I think for people, tuning in, first of all, like, how do you define independent media? What qualifies as independent media to you? And if this helps kind of narrow the question, what and who are we independent or seeking to be independent from? This can be either of you that wants to answer.
That's a tough question. No, that's very loaded out right there. So, what defines independent media, and how do we? So, you asked three questions right there. What defines independent media, and what were the other two?
You can pick any of them. Just like
All right. So,
what do you think makes independent media independent? Because like there's different definitions of what could make
yeah.
you independent. It could
Yeah.
be,
Well,
we've got
questions
the
like that right
funding
there.
model. Yeah.
Questions like that right there is what makes independent media independent media. When you could throw somebody off, you won't get you'll get a question like that sometimes on 60 Minutes, but not like, I'm like, wait a minute, you just asked like five questions
I
right
like
there and
to
threw me
start
off
it
my
broad,
game. Okay. And she
and
was casual with it too. She was very casual with it. But what makes independent media independent media is basically what I tried to explain a few moments ago, and that is when you number one, you aren't funded by corporations and things like that. Yes, you do have businesses that support you through sponsorships and ads and things like that, but that's more on a local level. You don't have corporations like Walmart and Amazon like funding your corporation and things like that. Your news network or news outlet, number one. And the second thing, what makes independent media is you aren't beholden to a board. You can actually report on the news the way it should be reported on, factually and with integrity, and you don't have to worry about being drowned out because you're going to lose funding or whatever. If you lose funding, and you're like, so what? We'll just go to the next one. And that's really what makes independent media. And the second thing that makes independent media is you're always in that startup mode phase, meaning you're always on the grind for the next story, to share the next story that isn't been talked about in mainstream media and things like that. So
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that was perfect. I was just looking for what are those kind of things that you think make something truly independent as media, because, especially with the funding models, I think is one way that I think it's easy to kind of think about like the different levels of what you might consider independence. And you brought this up a bit with a board. And I think that's an interesting concept because boards look different depending on what kind of legal entity you are. So Matter News, for example, is operating as a nonprofit. We're awaiting our own nonprofit status, and we have our own nonprofit board. But that board's sole mission is to ensure, pretty much sole mission is to ensure that we as a leadership stay in line with the mission of our organization with everything that we do, and that we spend our donor funds in line with that as well. Whereas the board of a corporation or the shareholders of a corporation or different types of organizations, their boards have very different goals and very different things that they're trying to accomplish. But not to go too much down that rabbit hole, Prince, did you have anything you wanted to add about kind of your views on what is independent media?
Yeah. I mean, I think of a few things. I think independent media has the ability to be subversive. I mean, if you look throughout any like liberatory or social justice kind of oriented or radical history, I think of like the draft dodging movement through the Vietnam War and how draft dodgers had newspapers that they passed along to other people that were trying to draft dodge. Or I think of the Black Panther Party newspaper. And so I think like those are two different models of independent media to me that are subversive. They have the ability to counteract narratives that the state pushes out. And I think that goes into my second point, which I think independent media it has a different audience. Like, and when I say audience, I mean it's not necessarily an audience. It's more, I think some of it can be like you have a different community in which you're accountable to. Because if you're corporate or if you're mainstream media, you have a board that you're accountable to or your funders. But if you're a local newspaper and you live in the community and you're a journalist and you're interviewing your neighbor, that is a different kind of a community accountability. And I think to me, independent media ideally contributes to just sort of like a community narrative or a community history. And so I think it has the ability to kind of examine the parts of a community or group of people that mainstream media doesn't want to look at, because like mainstream media is also about views. And so I think independent media has the opportunity to go deeper because of that subversiveness.
Absolutely,
Hey,
yeah.
can I add one more thing to that? Because that was phenomenal. What he said. Independent media also, when you think about it, the Freedom's Journal, one of the first African American newspapers, published on March 4th, 1827, in their lead editorial, they said, "We have to fund our own freedom. Too long have we waited for others to do it." And I think that is truly what makes independent media independent. Is we go out there, we not only cover the news, but we do it through our own funding, and we do it through us making it happen at the end of the day. Nobody else makes it happen but us. Is us funding the type of news we want to see.
Absolutely. And we might talk a bit about funding models at some point because I'd love to talk with y'all a little bit more about the nuances of like who should fund the news and what kind of like ways that you can do that. Because I think there's a lot of really interesting models, but that might be a whole other conversation. I love that you guys are bringing up, I think, two kind of one through line I saw because you both brought up some really good points, but I think one similar one was Devonte. You said something about being in startup mode and kind of always innovating and looking for the story that's not being told. And Prince, you were talking about, looking for the audience that wants that, narrative that's not being told and counteracting the narratives, the kind of official narratives and things like that. So I think that that really resonates with me in terms of independent media, and is something that we definitely seem to strive to do with the work that we're doing. So the next thing I want to talk about to hone it in a little bit after my last super broad question is why is independent news media and news important to a community like Columbus in a time like this where we're seeing for the first time more mass civil unrest, larger protests, more public attention on some of these issues that some of us are covering and paying attention to and advocating on. Yeah, why is independent media important to this community right now?
So I think why independent media is important to Columbus right now is the fact, if we just take what happened this weekend alone, the Columbus police told me and not Mer- Jalen, Jalen Grisso, your guys' managing editor, in a statement yesterday in a series of questions we asked them, they led off by saying that a lot of outlets and a lot of people have gotten the story wrong. And I thought that was very interesting that they would lead off their whole statement in the list of questions we asked. And it turns out that a lot of outlets, mainstream outlets, that gotten the story in a counting of events wrong. And what made independent media and allowed us to stand apart and allowed us to allow Columbus to see that they really needed us is that we didn't go right to publish. We didn't go right to air on Friday when it happened, mainly because we didn't have a big team like the other networks. But had we gone right to air, we probably would have been in that stratosphere of posting and publishing the information that wasn't as factually correct as it could be. So, independent media, the reason why it's needed here in Columbus is because we take our time and we actually investigate and research the story, get the facts, and then we come out with it. basically at the end of the day, it's what journalism used to be when you had the Walter Cronkites and Dan Rathers of the world, and before you got into this 24/7 cable news punditry thing. Independent media is just getting back to what the news industry needs to be, and that's why a community such as Columbus needs independent media.
I definitely agree. What do you think, Prince?
Um, uh, that's a good question. I mean, I think one is independent media. Like it can be a way to teach a community how to tell its own stories and how to investigate like the social, I don't know, like the injustices and wrongs happening in their community. So I think of like how Twitter was used in 2014 following the police murder of Michael Brown, and how involved people kind of just like looking at the discrepancies in what the mainstream media was saying about how he was killed, and looking at the errors and the inaccuracies. And so I think one, just looking at like how the internet and social media allows independent media to not even be something that's like adjacent to mainstream media, but it puts it in the hands of like the average person. Like if you can go to the most recent scene of like something happening in your community and live tweet about it, you're contributing to independent media. And then the other thing I kind of wrote down is independent media. I think um, in a year like 2020, where like I don't know, white people are suddenly waking up to fascism and neoliberalism, and I mean, millions of people have been brutalized in the streets in just this year alone. And so I think just looking at the way that the mainstream media just kind of situates the protests as like peaceful or property damage and rioting, and there's no kind of space in between. And I think independent media to me can help protect the community from the state. It can help protect the community from the police, because if you're reporting on things that marginalized people are going through and the ways that the state is harming them, or the ways that the state is targeting Black, queer, and trans people, if you report that accurately, it changes the community's relationship to these institutions that have power. Um, and I think that becomes like a tricky thing, because visibility isn't the only solution. But I don't know. And I also think of like this time in Columbus. It's like, since I'm newer to Columbus, I can only relate to Columbus so much in the way that I do Cleveland. And I see, like, to me, I grew up in Cleveland, and every time I go back, it's the city is just becoming so increasingly gentrified, and it's so unrecognizable to me. And one way that I see that mainstream media aids in that is that I think mainstream media to a city like Cleveland or Columbus, it's just like a PR machine for this kind of capitalist kind of pursuit of gentrifying and whitewashing a city and pushing out the poor people. And I think independent media, it allows people to tell the more true story. And in Columbus, that truer story would be, this is a city that's named after a colonizer, and it's a city where poor people are being pushed out, where Black, brown, poor people aren't safe, and another Black person was killed days ago. And so I think independent media allows us to tell a different story about our lives. And I feel like for me, as an organizer, as a freelance journalist, to me, the only way that I would ever really like proudly call myself a journalist is if I think through the framework of storytelling, and of what stories can I tell to help myself and other people get more free. And so I think in Columbus, if we have more independent media, I mean, maybe this city wouldn't be named Columbus. I don't know.
That's a great point. And I really appreciate a lot of the things that you just sort of dove into in your answer. I think one of the things that we'll be diving into in a future Matter Monday, I think it might be in a week or two from now. One of the topics we'll be talking about is cultivating trust in news, and sort of we're also going to be talking about the myth of objectivity, and sort of like, a lot of the nuances there. And so I think a lot of what you were speaking to is just like the trust that independent media really is trying to cultivate, that the mainstream media just doesn't have, by nature of who they are. They're mainly white cis males, and we know that from like the dispatches statistics they put out there, and independent media. I don't know the exact statistics. I didn't find any on it exactly, but I think for sure, I know that nonprofit news, for example, is way more diverse than corporate news, and so I assume independent media as a whole would be on a similar trajectory to some extent. And I think that we were talking today about how like just a lot of the people that, including myself, who have been community organizer in Columbus for years, now participating in the leadership of a news organization really breeds trust that people know that, we've been around here and we've been involved in the community. We are community members. And that's just a relationship that we have with the community and with our audience. And it's a different audience, like you said earlier. Who's your audience? Than necessarily the dispatch that we as independent media might have, although, of course, there's some overlap. I appreciated what you were saying about government and sort of how we hold people accountable, because that's literally why I started Matter News, as I was working for Franklin County Child Support Enforcement Agency, working on multi-level government research programs that were meant to improve government programs to make them easier for people, specifically child support clients, to navigate. And really, I just ended up leaving, even though I was doing the most innovative research and work you could be doing in that area, because I started hearing from people that they learn more from my Instagram than from the local news. And everyone who has participated for the most part in the child support program knows of its flaws and its participation in the mass incarceration, specifically of Black fathers. But there isn't a lot of scrutiny on that program. News outlets don't cover it. It's not sexy for whatever reason. And so it really flies under the radar, and there isn't a lot of public policy progress because there isn't that, independent media kind of, or any media really pushing on it. And so I really just resonated with what you were saying there, and why, it's really important, just if we want to see our government programs with COVID and everything. We know a lot of us are dissatisfied. A lot of us have been dissatisfied for a while with the way the government responds to things, but COVID has taught us that a lot of us are up a creek without a paddle, and no one's coming. There are no policies that are really getting at the root and really creating a safety net for people. So, without media scrutiny on public programs and why they exist and the history of them and who's been, painted in the media to use and abuse them, and things like that, is really intricate stuff to get into. And the press release thing you were mentioning is something we saw this past week, that some of the local outlets were literally just republishing verbatim, but they weren't publishing the like embedded document or like a screenshot. It was like they were republishing the press release in the article, almost as if it was the article. It almost looks like that if you're skimming it. So it's just a
I mean,
little.
that's how they write press releases too these days, is to make it like the articles. So all you
Right.
have to do is republish that, and that's your story.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, I just wanted to comment on some of those phenomenon that you mentioned, because I thought they are definitely very relevant to everything that's going on right now. So we just take a quick break at the moment. So we're going to go probably till about 8 p.m. If you are tuned in on any of our platforms, I'm going to start checking in and seeing if we have any questions. If you are tuned in and want to ask a question or bring up a point, please do that. And we are just going to be talking for a little bit longer, about till 8 p.m., about some more facets of this issue of independent media and news. Just want to do a quick thank you to our sponsors, Night Road Studio. Isaiah is streaming for us tonight, as he is every Monday, and we really appreciate Night Road Studio, Black-owned multimedia production company, for helping us out. They are a local business. And then we also thank Wild Goose Creative. We haven't been streaming out of there since the second wave of the pandemic, but we were. And we appreciate Wild Goose Creative, a local arts nonprofit that you can become a member of, for being a supporter of ours and sponsoring this event. So we will just roll through a little bit more of this. And if you all want to contribute to independent news, and you've been listening and you're sold that we need more independent news, a lot of us who, like we've been talking about, if you weren't tuned in, all three of us on this live stream tonight do have our own journalistic endeavors. Prince's, I think, being more freelance. but for me, tied to Gray Matter Media, Matter News, and Devontae's Unbossed and Unbought Network. So we do have independent media represented on this live stream tonight. And so we're talking about kind of firsthand experiences with independent media, and also from a community organizing standpoint. We're talking a lot about policing tonight just because that's been the bulk of Devontae's coverage, especially as of late, as well as Matter News's. And Prince is also involved in a lot of community organizing as well. So I'm really excited to jump into the second half of this conversation. If anyone tuning in at home wants to jump in, just hit us up on any of our feeds. And if you're watching on Instagram, reminder that you will get much better quality if you switch over to Twitch, Facebook, or YouTube. All right. So I want to hear a little bit from y'all, and not to put you on the spot, but can you think of any strategies that you use or that journalists you've seen use, or news organizations to maintain independence? So, regardless of whatever your model is, regardless of how independent you set out to be, no matter how you're funded, there's always the possibility that someone can influence, your coverage, and that you may not always be insulated from being independent. So, are there certain things that you do or that you've seen that really help journalists or news organizations or just media companies generally maintain that independence with their especially news content?
Well, for me, I actually just had this happen today. In fact, not to me personally, but to the network. I had two individuals call up one of my reporters and say, "Hey, you guys shouldn't be reporting on this without speaking with the family," and got my reporter like really flabbergasted and upset to the point that where I had to set the reporter down and explain to the reporter that, hey, look, we're the press. We're protected by the First Amendment rights. These are activists. Um, I don't know if they have ulterior motives or whatever, but we're doing our job. We not only have a responsibility to the family and the people who we are covering in the story, but in some ways we have a fiduciary responsibility. And I don't like to use the word fiduciary, but when it comes at the end of the day, we are a business. We have to make money, whether and the way we make money, for example, through you guys is through donations. You don't make money like the rest of us through sponsors and advertisers and things like that. And so that goes into your whole product and how you make money and how you're funded. Is you have a fiduciary responsibility. And what I went further to explain to that reporter is like, hey, look, you can't let them get to you. I thought you did the right thing coming to me. You may have not have done the right thing. I'm not throwing shade at taking a call or whatever, but please, this is going to happen. People, they either like or don't like the media. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse all at the same time, and it's something we all should know going into this industry. Is that at times people will love us and at times they won't. And as I always like to say, my haters keep me blessed. And when I don't have any haters or people talking down and dirty to me, I need to go find some new people. But yeah, I don't let the little stuff get to me to sum all of that up. And how does that reflect the coverage of a story is I continuously remind my team is that look, there was a time when people they couldn't get black news or the civil rights movement. It was only covered, and the information we have today is not because of CBS, ABC, and NBC. No, it is because of black journalists out there in the field, like Jet Magazine's Essence and publications like that, covering those stories. And I could go on and on and on. It's because at the time those were the independent media, the outlets of those days, of those independent outlets. This is where the real news comes from, of whether you recognize it at the time that it's happening or not. It comes from people like us, and as long as you keep in mind and you're level-headed with trying to get all sides, I think you'll be very successful. The approach that I take and I try and embed in my team to take is that we are the prosecuting attorney. we're the defense attorney, and we are the judge and the jury. We're all sides of this at once. And I know I keep going back to this weekend, but because it's so relevant and fresh, it's the easiest way to explain our business so people will understand it. This weekend we could have been first to publish, but we wouldn't have given all of the information factually correct. And that goes back to what I was just saying: prosecutor, defense attorney, judge, and jury, all at once. And you have to keep that in mind. Sure, you may feel one way about the story, but in some instances, you do have to remain impartial a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you brought up a lot of good points in there, and I appreciate that. Prince, do you have any thoughts on that? Especially, as someone who works independently, I'd be interested to hear how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few points. I'd say, like, as a freelance journalist, a few things that I personally do is one, I'm careful about where I pitch. There might be publications that I could pitch an essay or an article to that would easily accept it. Are they gonna monopolize on my blackness, my queerness? Are they gonna have me sell myself in a way that is inauthentic to white people? And I think a part of that too, um, as a journalist, is I think how you how you start individually as a journalist or as an independent media entity is like if you start with the right praxis, if you start publishing conscious content that talks about misogyny, talks about trans misogynoir, talks about xenophobia, talks about capitalism and colonialism, you're going to attract the right audience, and you're also going to attract the right allies and fellow journalists. And then I think on like a bigger kind of more structural level, I come at it from any media that I love or consume or model myself after is about liberation. It's about being anti-colonial. It's about having a critique of capitalism, because for me, media has no real point if it's in the service of white supremacy and capitalism. And so I go back to my point about how independent media allows us to be subversive. And so I think when you have a media model that is anti-capitalist, you don't have to operate as a business. You don't have to worry about how many clicks you're getting and how many advertisers might be interested in putting ads on your website. And that subversiveness also allows you to embed yourself deeper in the community, to have more trust. And I think another thing that I've been kind of trying to discover more as a freelance journalist, as far as like having more independence, is if you're a journalist or a writer, grants. I think a lot of people that come from money and have safety nets or can hire a grant writer, those people tend to get those awards and resources. But I think if people that are marginalized or who want to report honestly, want to seek out like grant money, it's something good to practice, and it allows you to do more long form journalism. And so I think uh, all of those things also come down to I think independent media doesn't it works against sensationalizing trauma. And so I think if you look at the Black experience, the queer experience, the trans experience, we only really exist in the media's eye through our suffering. And what would it look like if we lived in a media landscape that allowed us to live, and to show the different ways that we can live? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to ask a little bit more about your experience with freelancing. So how long have you been in Columbus?
I moved to Columbus at the end of 2018.
Okay, so you've been here a little bit now. Have you been have you been freelancing the whole time that you've been here, more or less?
Yeah, I've been full-time freelance, other than like maybe a side job or gig or something, but I've been full-time freelance since 2017. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. So great. I want to know a little bit more from your perspective in terms of the local landscape, Columbus, in terms of independent media. When I met, and it was the beginning of 2018, that I met Jalen Grisso, our editor in chief and one of my co-founders, and she has been she's 26, but she's been an investigative journalist for 10 years. And and I think y'all might know each other or be familiar. And she told me when we first met up, because the first time we kind of had coffee together, we talked about starting a company together immediately because we kind of had that synergy of wanting to start something and feeling like Columbus needed it. And at the time, she's also not from Columbus. She's actually from out west. And she was thinking about, she was like, you know what, I think this would be a great opportunity or is important for Columbus, but I was actually just considering moving away from Columbus, so I need to like let you know in a second once I decide if I'm moving or not. And the reason she was thinking about moving was because she had expected when she moved to Columbus there'd be so much more in terms of independent, nonprofit, journalistic outlets that she could work for potentially locally. And she found that to really not be the case. And she was really struggling to find anyone locally or very many opportunities locally to do the kind of reporting she wanted to do. And like you do, I think she has a bit of a standard for not wanting to work for outlets that want her to be clickbaity and generally wanting to do good work and really making sure that it's authentic, like you said, or aligned with her. And she was struggling to find that in Columbus. So I'm really curious, like, and then if you're able to, I don't know if you were also freelancing in Cleveland before that. I'd also be interested just to hear the comparison of what you've seen in different places you've been in terms of what there is in terms of independent news.
Yeah. I mean, in Columbus, I mean, I've definitely like I almost started a podcast out of the Columbus Free Press office. And so I think in Columbus there are avenues in spaces, but I think I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot because I got this grant last year, and one of the things that we had to do was kind of come up with a project or an idea that we wanted to push out there. And my idea was I wanted to start a citizens journalism collective. So I wanted to have a kind of collective where people who were interested in writing or investigative writing could come together. You could do like a few workshops, and then maybe you have a website where people start putting pieces on. And maybe we go to high schoolers and we teach them about journalism. And I don't know, like something about that to me was really fascinating. And I don't know. And I think independent media is important, especially in Ohio, because I think the stronger a community is and a more empowered a community is, especially on like a social justice and organizing level, I think there's also like that also strengthens independent media because I think I don't know like the two kind of go hand in hand to me in my mind and I don't know I just think it's like a stronger community allows people to tell their own stories. It gives people the time and the space and the resources to look at their lives and to think why are these things happening and how do we talk about it. And I think in Columbus I think on an organizing level on a community level this community has experienced a lot of loss. A lot of organizers have gotten burnt out. People have passed away. There's a lot of trauma. And so I think that healing is still necessary and is in process and needs to continue. And I think when that is stronger, I think people will feel, I don't know, like in a better place to be able to tell their stories and to engage with media on a deeper level. Because if you're if you know someone who's been shot and killed by police, I mean, maybe you don't want to talk to a journalist because it's too painful. I mean, what has it ever really like? I don't know. I think on like a deeper level, like I question like what is mainstream media given back to marginalized people, to Black people, to queer people, and I think since that question can't be answered, it still means there's a lot of work to do. And I do see Cleveland and Columbus as two very like I don't know like cities that have been beaten up and wounded and I think that makes it harder for people to step forward and to I don't know to want to I don't know produce things about that place. But I think it's here, and I think um, I don't know it's important work.
Absolutely. Devonte, I can't. You did get to talk a little bit about this. Do you have anything else you wanted to talk about on strategies before I move on?
No, he summed it up perfectly.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so interested to hear that about. your perspective from Cleveland to here, and yeah, how that ties in. And I guess I wasn't necessarily going to ask this, but I think just for you two, it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about independent media, specifically when it comes to like movement media. And so both of you, to different, I think in different ways, are involved in sort of movement media, or straddle the worlds of community organizing and journalism. And I don't want to paint exactly how those worlds mesh for you. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about, do you consider yourself a movement journalist, or how do you classify the type of journalism you do? And I know that could vary, especially for a freelancer, based on what outlet you might be working for. But I'm just curious, because for Matter, for example, we clarified that for us as independent media, sort of the lane we're in is we don't consider ourselves movement journalism. We don't consider ourselves advocacy journalism. We consider ourselves, though, like you were saying, some of those things earlier, Devonte, innovative. That we are trying to take some of the things from traditional journalism and respect those things, but bend things and change things and evolve things as we see necessary to ensure that we're not just saying, oh, because journalistic standards would say we should say something. There's certain things in the AP and everything that are not necessarily correct or empathetic and things like that. So having to even think about language on a very basic level, but also just different things about the way we cover, um, we don't necessarily, like I said, we feel like when you consume our coverage, you should not come away with it feeling like we're trying to convince you of something. But of course, that doesn't mean that we are necessarily devoid of influences and our own biases and sort of what we cover and things like that. We try to mitigate that. But I'm just curious in the kind of content you do. And I know, Devonte, for you, I'm like super interested to hear, because I don't think I've ever asked you how Unbought and Unbossed sort of classifies themselves. And then, yeah, Prince, as a freelancer, sort of how would you respond to that question?
So for the Unboss network, we were birthed out of a show that was on my tech platform at the time called the Unbought and Unbossed show. We were doing like a lot of national news, black focus national news, and when the movement, because this, or I guess it's even cliche to call it a movement, because this isn't a movement. Black Lives Matter. This is a movement, but what happened and what we were birthed out of wasn't a movement. It was and it's not even a tragedy. It's deja vu, is what I like to call it, because it continues to happen over and over again. And yet, it all started with George Floyd. Then, in the midst of that deja vu, it sparked over to Breonna Taylor, and then where we are now with Casey Goodson Jr. And so it's deja vu. And I think for me, and the network personally, because we try and cover news from a black perspective, because there's very little black outlets out there, especially here locally. Now that the a paper that was here prior for many years, I grew up with it, and I believe in like the last 10 years, or not 10 years, but probably the last 5 to 6 years, it's like gone obsolete. Called the Call and Post. It's bamboozled, and that was a black led paper that was all around Ohio, and they covered a lot of stories from the black community that you wouldn't see. But for us, we're no different than any other outlet. What makes us different is our funding model, because we asked our community to help fund us, as well as we uh, rely and depend on brand deals and sponsorships and things like that. But we're no different than 4, 6, or 10. We just tell the news in a different way, uh, in a way that's more humanizable. Like right now, and this is what a typical newscast is for us. We're having a conversation. I don't. I and if I'm producing a show, I don't have a Republican here, a Democrat here, or a black person here, white person here, me in the middle, and just go at each other going back and forth. No, it's about conversations, and that regard and respect, I don't see as being any different than any other outlet.
Um, I love this question because I think about this a lot. But I guess one, I think of growing up in America in an immigrant family as a gay black kid. I just think of like how growing up, like media framed so much of my life and how I viewed America and how I viewed myself. I think of watching black people stranded on rooftops and floating um, along the water in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. I remember like being on College Green at OU when the announcement came against the cop that killed Michael Brown that he wasn't found guilty, and I started crying, and it was like this panic attack. And a local journalist shined a giant camera in my face. I think of like going to Standing Rock and kind of live streaming there, and I don't know, like all of those things basically I don't know. And I guess like Standing Rock matters because after that, I went to the Philippines and I experienced, I don't know, just like what it's like to be Black in parts of the world where they've never seen a Black person before and having people pointing at you in public and laughing and people calling me Obama and Wiz Khalifa and just all kinds of. And so I think all of those experiences just showed me how violent and I don't know, erasing media is and how when we view it in these clear cut ways, you remove what it's like to be a black kid from Cleveland in the Philippines, having people point at you in public and call you Bob Marley or try to hand their dark skinned babies to you. And so I mention all those things because I think like we can't remove the fact that like everything that's done in media will become a part of our history. It's shaping the world around us. It's shaping the reason that people view me so violently or just differently than I am across the world. And so um, my relationship to it is I don't really consider myself like a movement journalist. I consider myself like a writer, an organizer. And if I'm out covering something as a freelance journalist and I'm at a demo and someone gets knocked over and a tear gas canister is right next to them, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna pull. I'm not gonna just stand there, not do anything. I'm gonna kick that shit away or try to grab the person and run because I've been in these streets getting beaten up too, like in my life. And so I think to me, it's like you have to be willing to go as far as you can to I don't know, be a part of the community, but also to tell the stories in that community. And I think once again, if it's from like an anti-capitalist kind of model, um, it's a different practice, and I think it involves like less of a label and it's more of your approach to it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone, and I feel like Prince, you definitely would be interested in this. Devontae, I'm sure you would too. And a lot of people listening, if you're interested in this topic of independent news and kind of cultivating trust in community news, there's a podcast called The View from Somewhere. Highly recommend it. If you're familiar, it's so great, and they talk about these kind of things all the time. And it is really tricky because we talk about it all the time as Matter News is like where do we draw the line of like like I said, we don't consider ourselves movement journalists and we want to be careful that we're not crossing lines. But at the same time, we do come from the community. And I have, for example, and I'm not heavily involved in our editorial process because I run more the business side of things. And I'm not a journalist by trade, but um, I, for example, have been, organizing on these issues for years. So the traditional journalism way of like, a lot of traditional journalists, it would be unheard of for them to like work for a traditional outlet or an outlet that's trying not to be movement journalists and have any political or community organizing affiliation or to have ever advocated on the issue they're covering. But to me, independent media is powerful because a lot of the times the people doing independent media are from the community. They have been involved in community organizing. They do have those connections. And so sometimes I think that makes it blurry for us. But there was an episode, I think, of the View from Somewhere recently, and I can't remember what the term was, but she made a distinct, or Lewis Raven Wallace made a distinction between like movement journalism, and then I forget what the other term was, but talking about the fact that like the way that independent media is done a lot of times takes on some of the characteristics of movement journalism, but doesn't necessarily have to be considered movement journalism. It's the way that you approach your subjects. It's going above and beyond. For one really great example, I think that happens all the time. People who speak to the media, so say we as the media are trying to cover people who have stories that come from underrepresented groups and are marginalized themselves, a lot of times people from those groups may not even fully understand what they're consenting to when they talk to a journalist. And
Mm.
so someone who might be a little bit more inclined to independent journalism or movement journalism, or are more sensitive to the fact that there's certain things you need to be aware of when you're talking to sources if you want to be a true empathetic and good journalist, which is to know you might need to let someone know, this is going to be on record. This, immigration proceeding you're telling me about may be public. So I need you to understand that before, and so a typical journalist, a traditional journalist, or a corporate journalist probably wouldn't do that level of engaging with their sources, because that's crossing in ways some lines for traditional journalism. But for those of us who are trying to do traditional journalism with a new spin that's more community oriented, I think those lines get tricky, and it's something that we're always trying to navigate and figure out where we sort of land on how we should handle some of that stuff. So I really enjoy this conversation. I could probably talk about it all night with you guys, and I'm sure I can tell you guys probably could too, or you all probably could too. But we will probably wrap up now. I don't think that when I checked last, I saw any questions on the feeds. If anyone else is looking and sees any, just shoot me a quick message or let me know. And otherwise, I'll just quickly ask you guys, do you have any additional comments or anything you want to close with before I just say kind of our final words? No
Well,
pressure at all. I just want to give you the
well,
chance to have anything
for
burning.
me, everybody, go in your pockets right now and pull out your card, Apple Pay, whatever, and just give $5. Just give $5 to Matter News and Gray Matter Media, because they're out here in these streets doing some phenomenal reporting like no other. I mean, I've experienced it working with their team, not just over the weekend, but
Oh,
for the past few months. So literally $5. That's all you got to give. And here, that's, if I'm being real with everybody, I'm not trying to throw shade or nothing, but that's cheaper than the cup of coffee we all drink at Starbucks, because we know we got to have that coffee that's not on the menu. I'm like that too. Sometimes I need that extra boost that's not in the menu. But hey, if I know it's tough times, so let me break it down for you like this: $5 transfers and breaks down to actually roughly somewhere around 13 cents a day,
oh my God.
somewhere around that 13 cents a day. So just get $5 to continue allowing the real news and factual accurate news to continue happening here in the city.
You just did my job for me doing the marketing plug at the end. I really appreciate that. And Devontae, though, before we get off, I want to make sure, though, we're not in competition in any way. We collaborate, and that's what I really enjoy about independent news. Is I found that we, by necessity, I think we collaborate because we really have to be able to have the resources to be able to do some of the work we do. But I want to know, for you, how can people listening support you, and the Unbossed Network?
Well, for right now, it's not about the Unbossed Network. It's all about you guys at Matter News. So you guys will find, if you want to know how you could help us out, feel free to DM me, drop it in the comments. But right now, it's all about Matter News and
You
you
are the
guys.
best. Stop it. You're the best. Okay. And then Prince, do you have any final words, or do you want to let people know where they can find you or how they can support your work?
Yeah. For folks that want to check out maybe some of my writing or my past media work, you can just go on my website, princeshakur.com, Princeshakur. are. And if you want to check out my newsletter, it's called Millennial Writer Life. I kind of just share tips, tricks, anything kind of related to being a millennial, being a freelancer, a writer, a little bit about the business side of it. Yeah, so you can check out those two links. And of course, check out Be Quick. We have donations. You can donate to our emergency fund or our fund for our office space. And you can check out more of our stuff at bqic.net.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you, for being on, for your really great perspective, for sharing it with us. And in closing, Devonte said most of it. This is a fundraiser. We are trying to fund independent nonprofit news. It's not easy. It's expensive to get quality information out there. Devonte said earlier on, we really don't just put anything out there. Those of us who are really trying to put out good local independent news are taking our time. And, our small independent team gave up their weekend just kind of scrambling to try to make sure things were covered right. So we really appreciate any donations you can give. We really encourage you to consider giving monthly. You can give a very small amount every month, and that helps us be more sustainable, have a better budget to work with, and to be able to prove to grant makers and all kinds of people that they should invest, because Columbus as a community is investing in nonprofit and independent news for the community. And please do stay tuned. Like we said, we have a lot of content coming out that's going to be speaking to, especially the case of Casey Goodson Jr. and a lot of other important local policing and gentrification and development issues that we sort of touched on at one point are also in the mix of what we cover. So please stay tuned to Matter News, the Unbought and Unbossed Network, and local independent and freelance journalists like Prince, and the organizations we're all involved in. So I appreciate you all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your night and you all be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank you to our
everybody.
sponsors as well. Have a good night.